So what a way to talk about, what a time to talk about Zero Trust at 3:30 p.m. on the third day of a conference. Everybody excited? All right, let's do it. So thank you. And I appreciate you taking time to attend this session. So I'll start with a little story to tell. 2 years ago, I was at Boston moderating a Gartner event. So Gartner has a smaller event called Evanta. And what they do is they basically go to different cities and invite some of the senior executives from public companies to come, talk about different topics, right? And this is a topic that has been all of us, I'm sure you have heard about it. So I found myself in a situation trying to moderate this session with, senior executives of companies. So obviously, I had to do a lot of homework because 2 years ago, I myself did not know very well what this idea is. If you go to YouTube, if you go to your Google search and just search on Zero Trust, you will get so many links that it's not even funny because there's only so many hours in a day and we are all busy. So how do we then do our day job and still find time to go through pages and pages of content? So when I was going through that, I was saying that, look, this has to be simplified. And going back to the moderation that I did for these senior executives, I asked them the question, have you started talking about Zero Trust yet? And they all nodded. They all said yes, right? Then my next question is, do you have a common understanding of what it means? They say no. So that means that it's kind of open to interpretation, and it shouldn't be, really. So what I did was then after that event, I ended up writing a white paper. And the whole idea is it gotta be more simplified so that people can really understand and what needs to be done. All of you must have gone to our exhibition floors. How many vendors you have come across that you have never heard about? Many? Why do you think that's the case? Any guess? I mean, worse since if we go to RSA, there are even more number of vendors, but why is that?
The identity space is growing.
Good. Anyone else?
Innovation in the field is allowing a multitude of options.
Love it. Did you attend David Lee's session today morning? Anybody? So he talked about how we have created problems for ourselves, right? So security has always been bolt-on, right? We roll out a business functionality and build security on top of it. That leads to more problems. Then later we go back, oh, I messed up there, so let me go back and fix it. That actually reflects why the reason, and that's the reason why you have so many vendors, because there are so many problems and everybody is trying to solve a problem. How many times you have had vendors coming in trying to position their solution as Zero Trust? Anybody? So what we need to do is, what I'll attempt to do in the next few minutes, condense what I have learned through my own research and speaking to different customers, and what I have seen, kind of what are some of those challenges, right? And hopefully you can leave this room with a better understanding of what Zero Trust means, what you can be doing today and tomorrow to kind of position you on that journey. I kept this name kind of purposefully like that. What does it mean? Zero Trust Identity Journey. What does it even mean? I wish that there was a better name for Zero Trust, because that's me. When we talk about Zero Trust, it is, we cannot do business if we don't trust people. We have our employees, we have our partners, customers, so on and so forth. So how do we do business with them if we don't trust them? So there is always inherent level of trust. However, you have also heard about news, right? IBM did this report last year, 2022. They said that the average time that an attacker is in your environment, by the time you found out and did something about it, it's about 722 days, about 9 months. That's how long it has taken for people to even find out that there is an adversary in your network. The term zero trust has been around for more than 10 years. Forrester coined that term, but the idea was, given the fact that some of these statistics support, right, that we know that we have adversaries in our network for that long before you did anything about it. So that means breach is almost assumed. You always assume that there is an adversary in your infrastructure. Then, if you look at various cyber attack patterns, what happens is they will gain access to an account to begin with, right? Because they're after data that is meaningful for them. So they get access to an identity, then they laterally expand in your network. And then from one thing leads to another. So here are some definitions of what the zero trust is. I really like the first definition. It's an information security model that denies access to applications and data by default, like default deny. Threat prevention is achieved by only granting access to network and workloads, utilizing policy informed by continuous contextual risk-based verification across users and their associated devices. That's a lot of work. Likewise, there are other definitions. NIST has published a paper, SP 207. When I read this paper, it's a very lengthy paper, right? And sometimes, that's my personal opinion, it's very difficult to understand. So, what are the things that you should be focusing on? So here are the 5 things that you want to keep in mind when you think zero trust. It's default deny, access by policy only. Some of the vendors are trying to solve that. Least privilege access, security monitoring, incident response, continuous risk-based verification. And I'll touch on each of those in my subsequent slides. Before I do that, we get confused with good cyber hygiene and what zero trust means. Don't get confused with that. And that's because zero trust is a journey that it will take time for you to get there. It is important, if your current maturity level is low, think about zero trust. You have different things in your environment. I'll talk about that in a minute. Think about them as Lego pieces. So when we build a structure, we put all those Lego pieces together. If you miss a piece, your structure will not exist. It will be incomplete. So on that, the 2 things that you want to keep in mind is, when you talk about zero trust, you want to keep in mind a subject, which is a user, and the resource, right, which is an information asset. It's all about a user trying to access a resource. But then there are a lot of pieces in that. What is in between? For me, as a user, to access anything, whether it's in my own data center or in the cloud, I have to traverse through a network. I have to use a computer, right? For me, from here to get there. And some of these zero trust principles must be applied at every component of your infrastructure, whether it's your endpoint, the network in between, and then some of the policy that you're going to enforce. Now, let's look at this picture. What I have done is created this map, what I call it a capability map. So you will see a lot of green boxes there. Those are the green boxes that all of you know. Those have been around forever. Nothing new there. However, somebody talked about innovation, the fact that there are so many vendors there, right? How we are innovating. So if you look at somewhere around, so the word zero trust itself was coined sometime in 2010? So it's been around for a while. But there was not a lot of activity happening. You know why? Because we lacked capabilities. Several years ago, in 2009, I did a consulting for a financial services company. This is when Zero Trust was born. They had a very interesting program where they separated network domains. And then they had very tightly defined policies of, okay, if you're part of this domain, you can or cannot get to that other domain, which I thought was very smart at that time. And they created sometime in 2007, way before even people started talking about it. Now, Zero Trust came into play, but, well, how do we do it? Because the capabilities do not exist. Then, a lot of innovations have happened at the network layer. I'll tell you why. The pandemic happened. Suddenly, organizations have announced that I'm going to have everybody in my company remote. They will all work from home. But how? You had the VPN, but VPN creates a lot of exposure because once you authenticate to a VPN, you have access to your entire network. You remember I talked about lateral movement? That's a perfect thing for an attacker to exploit because once you authenticate it, you are in the network, there is no more boundary after that. You can go to wherever, do whatever. Then this idea of ZTNA came into play, Zero Trust Network Access or architecture. What does it mean? In your traditional VPN, you had a client, you open up the client, you authenticate, you are in the network and do what you do. But the user experience was different. You had to do it only when you were remote. When you are in your own premise, you did not have to do VPN because you are on the network. With ZTNA, what you do is you still had, it provides you that seamless experience regardless of you are sitting in Starbucks or you are at home. How does it do it? It has changed. That is to me, that's the first wave of Zero Trust type enforcement. What it did was, as opposed to giving you access to the whole network, what it does is it has a little client running on your computer, then it connects to a proxy, that's a network device or a cloud-provided service or whatever, and then you define policies to allow people access to only one application or set of applications that they are supposed to. That's a network level of control. Then from there, other capabilities like SASE combines some of these ZTNA principles and others. Then when you talk about endpoint, traditionally we had antivirus, malware, those sort of things. Now we are talking about EDR, right? Endpoint detection and response. That's the next level of maturity, right? So instead of signature-based verification, now it is providing you intelligence, right? Based on analytics so that you learn on an ongoing basis, right? And you enhance the security at that endpoint. And I'll tell you how all of this tied together. In the data layer, we have DLP, access governance, those things, nothing new. What is changing in the IAM world? Now, why is IAM important for Zero Trust? We'll talk about that in a little bit detail. But where IAM is changing in some of this authentication, authorization, federation, all those stuff we have had for a while. What is changing? Orchestration. And I'll explain what orchestration means. What is changing? Passwordless authentication. How many vendors you have seen that talked about passkeys? That's changing. But that's not Zero Trust, and I'll explain in a minute. Cloud infrastructure entitlement management. As organizations started moving to the cloud, there's this entire category to discover and do like cloud entitlement management. As per Gartner, 90% of cloud entitlements are over-provisioned. So how do we address that problem? right? Passwordless authentication. There is also a lot of machine learning going on in our identity world. So the point of this slide is the movement to the cloud, and suddenly all or many people being remote has increased the pace of innovation. We have not seen this rate of innovation in many years that we have seen in the last 5 years. In a good way, right? But going back to my point, let's look at what the zero trust reference architecture looks like. This is very important for us to understand. When you talk about capabilities or organizational capabilities, you want to focus on 3 things: strategy, planning, and operations. And that also applies to zero trust. Because without a strategy, now you saw we talked about ZTNA, we talked about SASE, those are at the network layer. We talked about EDR, that's at your endpoint. Then we talk about how policy enforcement, right, that will be at the application layer. But the point is, you need all of those capabilities. You know, think about the Lego blocks I was talking about. If you miss a piece, you will not be able to build your building. So when you talk about or think zero trust, you want to talk about what those Lego pieces are. And those Lego pieces you saw in my previous slide. But we are adding more to those Lego pieces. That's why all those vendors exist. Because some problems that we identify or did not identify before, or somebody thought that, well, there's a better way to solve this problem, that's where innovations are born. So what is important for you to understand in this? You remember I said that you must, so when it comes to user accessing a resource, if you don't know and manage your users, if you don't know what is critical asset for your business, what are you protecting? Nothing. So some of those foundational pieces are know your users, know your information assets. How will you know your users? We'll talk about that in a minute. What will you do about your assets? You need a CMDB so that what is critical for your business is not subjective. Somebody has taken it through a process to define, okay, these are my configuration items and these are the most critical assets for my business, because those are the ones that you want to protect. And apply appropriate controls and policies to make sure that, you know, those are protected adequately. So that's the asset management on the left-hand side. Identity management, right? There are 3 pillars in that, right? Identity governance, privileged access management, and access management. And I'll explain on the next slide as to why that is important for zero trust. The other aspect to understand is there's a policy enforcement point. What is a policy enforcement point? The example that I gave, let's say ZTNA. If you have a ZTNA solution, right, it enforces policies. So that's your policy enforcement point, right? It is determining, okay, for this user can get to these applications. Then it has ability to orchestrate some of that too. Is the endpoint healthy? Do you have antivirus? Do you have EDR? Any other controls? So that you are looking at all these different aspects before allowing access to the user. Then I talked about strategy, planning, operations. Operations is important too. When I said that attacker is in your environment for undetected for 700 however days, many days on an average, you need a strong security monitoring too. That's where SOAR is born. Security, orchestration, automation, and response. So that you can look at patterns, then use these SOAR capabilities to drive the follow-on action on items that you detect. One thing that I did not add in my slides, there's a new capability called ITDR. That's Identity Threat Detection and Response. Now we are talking about how do we then expand that model to learn more about what is happening in identity, right? What are some of the identity-related threats or outliers that happen in my environment so that A, I know, B, I can do something about it. So all these pieces that you see on the left-hand side and right-hand side, they are all part of those Lego blocks. And they all have to talk together to make sure that it's, you are able to apply those policies. Now, why is identity important for Zero Trust? Go back to this slide. You see where I have that link between policy enforcement point and an identity provider on top. Because all these policy enforcement points will rely on an identity provider, whether it's your directory, it's an authentication solution, whatever it is. Because those ZTNA or SASE solutions, they are not identity. They're network-level enforcement of access. So they rely on an external source to authenticate users to begin with. Now, if you talk about identity, I talk about there are three key pillars in identity. Identity governance, privileged access management, and access management. And within each of those are different capabilities that you have. If you see the capability status, those are long-standing. Like we have, sure, products have got better, their capability improved, but in terms of the problem they're solving, they have always been there. But what is the Zero Trust prerequisite that each of these are supporting? Now you talk about when I said know your users and know your information assets. So identity governance is all about know your users and manage them. Because think about this. Even if you had the best shining toy as a ZTNA or something, if your user was not removed from the directory when the person left your organization, that's useless. Now you're authenticating a user that's actually not even, it doesn't even work for you. So that identity hygiene is very important in order to position yourself on your journey to Zero Trust. We talked about least privileged access on that first slide, right? Some of the PAM solutions will help enforce that so that you can do things like just-in-time provisioning, right, for privileged access. You monitor who is doing what once they gain access to, privileged access to their systems. So the point is, you cannot enforce or attain end-to-end Zero Trust unless you have all these building or Lego pieces in place. Those Lego pieces, from an identity standpoint, you need a governance solution. You need a privileged access solution. You need an access management solution. Not only that, you cannot do Zero Trust on your own. So talk to your friends in other groups within your environment. Talk to your network team. Talk to your endpoint team, because it's a team sport. They all have to participate and do their end of the thing, right? Their Lego pieces, so that then finally we can all tie it together and make that enforcement of end-to-end Zero Trust a reality. So do we have all capabilities now? Yes, for the most part. And there's also a lot of consolidation that's happening in the industry, right? Going back to my example on the shop floor, you cannot buy 100 toys to do Zero Trust. So some of those capabilities will consolidate, so that instead of 100 toys, maybe you have 10 toys or 15 toys. But it will still allow you to enforce that, right? So here's your capability journey. So right now on the left-hand side, you have, it's a focused on perimeter base. We had VPN, firewalls, intrusion detection, network-based authentication, like I talked about. Once you authenticate to a VPN, you are in the network. That was our old state. In the new state, it's focused on identity-based controls. It's talk about per application-based authentication. That's why when you talk about ZTNA, we talked about, instead of authenticating the user to the network, we will authenticate based on a per app basis and allow access that way. In between, if you have, think about the first column as pieces of those Lego blocks. If you have some of those Lego blocks missing, you want to start considering adding those missing pieces so that you have all the pieces to build a building. But not only that, you don't want to stop there. You have to mature it, because I have seen many organizations, let's say they have bought a solution, but they never expanded in their environment, because in order to attain true zero trust, you also have to have significant amount of automation, a lot of orchestration, right? Because orchestration is what? So that's all those Lego pieces talk to each other. That's orchestration. So you have to have those Lego pieces talk to each other, and that will allow you to enforce some of these policies. But you cannot get there if some of those key components are missing. So start adding those missing pieces, right? So that will help you in two ways. If you add a missing capability, it may not position you as a true zero trust architecture tomorrow, but that is a progress, because now you're improving maturity, you're adding capabilities that you didn't have, so that will allow you to keep moving the needle. Do better cyber. So your end goal may be zero trust end-to-end, but there will be many steps along the way so that your maturity is improving on an ongoing basis. And that's a win too, right? If I can do one thing better, why not? And that's your, when you start having those discussions with your business, that's what you want to talk about. It's not so much about zero trust by itself, but how do I improve my cyber capabilities by adding those pieces that doesn't exist today. So where should you start? Know and manage your users, right? That's your identity governance. Know and manage your critical information assets. That is your asset management, or a CMDB. A solid CMDB can also drive and streamline a lot of automation down the stream as well. Then build those foundational capabilities. Consider doing ZTNA. Talk to your friends in other infrastructure groups so that, like I said, they can start working on adding their Lego pieces too. Then there are orchestration capabilities. Either if you have a strong development in-house, you can build those yourself, or there are other tools in the marketplace to do orchestration. Like a lot of the leading vendors are adding orchestration capabilities to their toolkit. Then, pilot implementation. One of my favorite, as I think more about zero trust, will be, we, within the information security world, we spend a lot of time doing exceptions. We define a policy, people say that, oh, I need to do this. So guess what? Somebody will file an exception. Then we spend hours and hours and hours updating that exception. What a waste of time. I believe that once some of the zero trust principles are put in place, where it's more automated, those exceptions will go away, because that's your way of doing business and can drive a lot of efficiency in that process. So, conclusion, it is important to balance usability, security, and user experience. So while you are doing all of this, you cannot forget about your users, right? Trying to make the user experience consistent on an ongoing basis is very important. The other thing is, it's a team sport, like I said. So just doing the identity piece is not enough. You have to do other pieces too, and the identity is a key enabler of that process, because know your users. That's what identity management does. Talked about orchestration. One of my other favorite is some of these standards will also change. So I'll give an example. When we talked about the policy enforcement point, looking at the endpoint to see if you have EDR, antivirus, all of that, so that it's secure, or it's coming from a trusted source. You may have digital certificate there, right? Which is that you trust that end device. So when you validate all of those, right, it's improved security there. Now, What will you do in a B2B situation? So we do a lot of identity federation, right? We do SAML as an example. So if you think about SAML in this situation, if I have a device that I manage, I issue a digital certificate so that when I'm making those decisions, I can go and check that device to see it's a trusted certificate and hence a trusted device. You cannot do that if it is a third party because you don't manage those systems. But if you look at our current SAML, the SAML assertion allows you to put some identity information in that SAML assertion. It has no endpoint information, none of that. So some of these additional verification that you may want to do in your B2B situation, the current set of standards doesn't allow that. So I bet that some of these, because for the most part, people are now focused on zero trust generally in the enterprise world. Some of these B2B, B2C scenarios will come in the future, and some of these standards, I think, will change. But the point is, you don't have to keep waiting for these things to be. It's not perfect. But taking incremental steps, like you call it zero trust or what, it doesn't matter. The most important thing is, am I improving my capabilities? Am I adding those Lego blocks so that my cyber maturity improves, my detection and response capabilities get better along the way, and eventually, I will be able to do end-to-end zero trust enforcement. So that ends my any questions? Do you have so let me ask you this. Do you think that it is helpful? Do you have a slightly better understanding than when you walked into this room? Okay, that's great. So if there are any other questions, feel free to reach out. We can help along the way as well. And